lot of hands going up, yeah. So he founded that particular web social media service, and he's also the founder of a meetup group called Hacks Hackers. It's a group that brings journalists and programmers together, and I have been doing the Austin-based chapter of Hacks Hackers for the past 5 years, and so I've been really excited to be a part of that. When we started this 5 years ago, when he started it 6 years ago, not that many people were thinking about this combination of programmers and journalists and doing data visualizations and working with data, and now what's come to fruition is that these collaborations have become very meaningful and important, and hopefully a lot of you are thinking in that direction for your careers. So let's give everyone a hand for being here. We're really excited to have all of you. So I just gave a little brief introduction to each of you, but what else would you like to share about your path to where you are right now? We'll start with you, Anna.
Sure. So I graduated Texas State with a Mass Comm BA in 2008 and went immediately to American University up in Washington, DC, which is where I've been ever since then. It's almost 8 years. And for a while, I was helping fund journalism startups through my work at JLab, which is a center at American University, working with Jan Schaefer, which was fantastic. That was during when sort of the citizen journalism movement was really taking off. And we were able to sort of throw money at situations and see what happened. And if it was a colossal failure, we're like, oh, this was a colossal failure. Or this worked, and we wrote about what worked. And that's where I met these two guys. Actually, originally was back in the journalism days. And then decided to switch gears completely. It was very, very strange, but because of the tech background that I had and the learnings that I had from Cindy being here at Texas State, I took a job coding for the web at the NRA, the National Restaurant Association. So I was a front-end coder for a little while, and then just kind of started grabbing projects. I was like, well, it's not really being done the way it should be, and I understand the user experience, so I'm just gonna take it and like make it my own. And I started doing this for like 2 years, and then finally they were like, why don't you just write your own job description because you're not doing what we hired you to do. And so I wrote it, and now I get to work with all the high-tech companies in Silicon Valley, so Google, Facebook, Yelp, OpenTable, everyone out there, all of the financial companies, Visa, MasterCard, and American Express, as well as all startups that deal with restaurants, of which there are plenty. You probably have several on your phones right now. So I work with them and our restaurant members to figure out what is the next iteration of technology, both consumer and business facing. Right?
I'm here because the web is amazing and you don't have to ask anybody's permission to make things on it. And I'm very lucky that I grew up in that period of time, because before that, if you wanted to be in media, you had to work your way up through the standard channels and pay your dues and do all that stuff. And I didn't have to do any of that, actually. Well, I paid my dues, don't get me wrong. I did a lot of programming. I started at Texas Monthly. I got an internship there. The internet department was a closet, and they put 2 of us in it. And we built the website, and they gave me a job, so I dropped out of school and did that. And then I got back in school, studied astronomy, and then I dropped out again because I started the first web portal in Australia. And unfortunately, I didn't ever get back to school, but school was a bunch of fun. And then, got in politics, got very involved in building online communities, and that led me into building online communities for sports fans. SB Nation is where we started, built a company about 8 years ago. It started in my basement, and then we turned that into a company called Vox Media. And my job is really to figure out, how do you build a modern media company? And what I think that means is, how do you build a technology company that does media? Because we're not in this time anymore where it's media companies using technology. It's, which is kind of the old way of thinking about it. It's really, how do we figure out with these things, which is how most people are interacting with media and news and information these days, how do you build really incredible user experiences on this that people want to use and get the news?
I want.
That's good that he can own it. Yeah, so I just had to point that out since you guys can't all see that in the audience. I do not have any Texas immediate connection, actually, but I'm happy to be back here. I've been here a bunch of times for South by Southwest, and it's nice to be here when it's not South by Southwest and the city is sort of normal, the normal weirdness level of the way Austin is. So yeah, I I guess we're all kind of talking about where we came from. So I at school, when I was an undergrad, was like obsessed with working at the school paper. And basically that's what I spent all my time doing. That led me to then work at the AP because I wanted to go and see the world as a journalist. So I had a career for about 12 years working as a correspondent and bureau chief all around the world, covering wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and covering earthquakes and disasters, covering opera and breakdancing and things like that too, covering all sorts of stories. We kind of saw what was happening back here, back in the US, in places like Silicon Valley, about media changing, and I just wanted to be a part of that. So I had a chance to kind of return and do this fellowship that Professor Royal also has done at Stanford, and kind of take a break and look at where things were going. And that's what led to then the creation of Storify. I went back briefly to my old job and managed to piss off a lot of bosses by trying to like do innovative things. So I thought, okay, I'm going to just leave and try to do something on my own. And that's where that came from. And it's been kind of a crazy adventure in doing new things. But like Trey says, I mean, it's an amazing time now where there is so much opportunity that you can start something and reach a global community with it. So I think that is really this amazing time that we live in.
I think this is a great panel because we have all range of people doing innovative things. I mean, we have somebody who's done a startup. We have Trey who's working within a larger organization but being innovative. And then Anna, you are consulting with a range of companies on helping them move into the digital world, be more innovative. So we've got the full range of places where you may end up. So in the context of what each of you do, how do you define innovation, and what are some of the examples of things that you think are innovative? Who wants to start?
I want to start. Here's the way I think about innovation, at least within the organization that I'm in. It's funny to hear it be called a large organization because just a few years ago, there was only about 20 of us, and now there's 500 of us, and that's what happens when you grow a company really fast. It's super scary. Innovation is really, we're in this crazy time, right, where everything is changing in media constantly, and this is why being a technology company is really important. You have to be able to kind of keep up with this pace, right, and the pace is actually set by y'all, and that's the fun part about it, right? The pace is set by how people use their phones, how they're using the internet, what their expectations are about things, right? And so I think innovation is being able to push into that to, surprise people with ideas and sort of delight them with that, but it's also being able to respond to it. But the real change, like the real innovation, is actually making that change within your organization, within the products that you create, and being able to affect it. Right? Because innovation sometimes gets sort of like caught up as like a bunch of shiny objects, and that's experimentation. Innovation is really like making change, and it's a hard thing to do. It's a fun thing to do, but it's something where you're constantly having to keep up with a certain pace of things.
I'm glad you bring up about internal innovation a little bit, Trey, because that's definitely something I've had to deal with at the NRA. I've said National Restaurant Association, so you know what I mean when I say NRA. Buns, not guns.
That NRA, not the
like,
other.
okay.
Buns, not
Buns,
guns.
not guns.
Yeah.
So the NRA is almost 100 years old. We're getting ready to celebrate our centennial, and that is a very old organization in comparison to a lot of other ones. Trying to change things from the inside is not comfortable for most people. And in fact, I think when my executives use the word innovation, they like the shiny factor. They like kind of what that stands for. But really what I'm doing on the inside of this old organization is disruption. And that's sort of the other side of it. And that's the not comfortable, we have to question everything. We have to re-examine what we're doing. And that can be really challenging. And you have to learn how to do that in a way that isn't going to really hurt people. So you have to be very emotionally intelligent on how to deliver new ideas. That's really key. Because you can say like, no, you're wrong, and I'm a millennial, and this is how it's supposed to be, and they will not listen to you. They will shut you down immediately. But if you do your homework, you put it together in a project proposal, so that you've like ticked off all the things that they're going to ask you about, like how much is this going to cost? Where's the money going to come from? Who's going to staff it? If you do all of that for them, they're more willing to accept new ideas. And I've done that multiple times. So yeah, that's kind of how
That's some of the best advice I've ever heard, by the way. Did you just hear that? Y'all should write that down because that's literally how you get things done.
Yeah.
And sometimes everybody's like, well, I have the idea. And that's not enough, right? Or I like saw
Execute.
this shiny object or whatever. And like that's like the realest advice I've ever heard. Like make a plan, like do the research, do the homework, come up with it, make it easy for people to take your idea and run with it.
Yeah,
Make it
that's-
hard for them to say no.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have empty project proposal plans if you need to use them in a nice Word document format.
So Bert, you left an organization because you felt a little constrained by your ability to be innovative, and you started your own thing. So how do you define innovation in that environment, and what were some of the challenges you
Yeah, well, I think, I guess I view innovation as like going on offense against what is happening and changes, whereas sometimes large organizations play defense and are afraid to try things and come up with reasons why they should not do things. I mean, the great thing about innovation, and about, again, today is you can actually build stuff and show the path. Which is another thing I would say is definitely key in convincing other people of your ideas too, is simply like do it and show that you can actually do something, build this saying, what we heard yesterday, whatever, demos, not memos. I don't know who came up with that originally, but yeah, that's the amazing thing today, that it is, you don't need to buy a bunch of computers and servers and whatever. Everything is there for you to use and experiment with. So for me, that was what we wanted to do. We were able to start over a blank slate, a startup, me and one co-founder figuring out like, okay, if you could combine journalism and social media, what does that look like? What does storytelling look like if you don't have to worry about the legacy of this is how we've always done things for the past decades? So I think that to me is what innovation is about, is kind of the freedom to start from a blank slate.
So how many of you would like to start your own company? You have ideas about doing a startup? Okay, a few people. So Bert, do you want to go into more detail maybe about the background of Storify and bring us, not a dream crusher, but, tell us how Storify evolved and bring us up to date.
Okay, it's again, these paths, as I'm sure Trey, who also started what is now Vox, can sympathize with. Things look very logical in hindsight, but while you're in the middle of it, do not look like you have any plan or know what's going on. So now I can point back and say, oh yeah, we tried this didn't work, this is where things went. But no, it's total chaos, really, right? I had a different idea for a startup. I was trying to work with different people. I ended up finding this person who I worked with as a co-founder. He had a different idea. We kind of came together. We tried one thing that he had been working on that didn't really work. We tried other experiments that led to what became Storify. But that whole process actually was like a year and a half before actually, leaving this fellowship to actually launching something that people could use. So and that time was very messy and, wasn't clear what we were going to be doing. So I think, these things, yeah, it just looks more clean in hindsight than it really is. But once you're onto something, that's a nice feeling, and things are starting to take off. We ended up, launching at TechCrunch Disrupt and demoing on stage, like in the Silicon Valley TV show. We actually got to do that. Raising money from investors who also, like in the Silicon Valley TV show, are not all they're cracked up to be always. Actually,
How many of you watch that TV show, Silicon Valley? Any of you?
Okay.
Wow, HBO is not that popular with.
Okay, it's not that. Okay. So it's interesting. It's a rocky ride, like dealing with that, figuring out how to get your product out there. You kind of do everything at the start. Like you're the person, like they say, taking out the trash, cleaning the bathrooms. Like literally, yeah, I've done a lot of stuff, just the logistics of starting a company and dealing with all that kind of thing. But yeah, we were fortunate that we kind of grew the product and eventually ended up selling the company in late 2013 to Livefyre, this company that does a lot of social curation type things on the web. And I actually don't even work at Storify anymore. So I've since exited the company, which is a kind of bittersweet thing to see your child off on its own there. but also nice that it continues and that all of you, that's really amazing to see all the hands go up in the room here of people who have used it.
Mm-hmm. So Trey, do you want to talk about sort of the evolution of Vox then? Since you said it went from, a small group to like 500 employees now, how have you seen innovation change in that environment?
Yeah.
Or how have you driven it to change?
I mean, you know, the idea started with, you know, it was pretty simple, right? Which was, you know, we started in sports media, and sports media back in like 2007, 2008 was kind of a drag. It was only ESPN and, you know, the big media companies doing sports. And if you wanted to like talk about sports or write about sports or whatever, you had to kind of break into that system. And, you know, the idea that we had was that, you know, sports fans are fans of teams. They're not, you know, ESPN, you go to like ESPN/NFL/Dallas Cowboys. We're like, you know, actually fans are fans of teams. So we built sites that were based around those teams, right? So Blogging the Boys is our Cowboys site. And we sort of started with this idea that we're going to build community around that. And, you know, everything that we did, you know, it's sort of the same thing. Like, this is very true. Like, whenever you hear startup people talk about their company, and like, if they sound like everything was super perfect and they're geniuses, then they're full of it, because it doesn't work that way. Like, in hindsight, it's nice to put together this like beautiful story of like how you got to this place. But the reality is that you start with this idea and you mess up a bunch, and you mess up some more, and you mess up a little bit more, and you learn a lot through that process. And I think the thing that from where we started to where we're at right now is we're very lucky that we started in sports, because from a media perspective, it's, you know, sports are something that people are super passionate about. Social kind of like binds to that naturally. It's, you know, it's very real time. There's a saying that every night's election night in the sports department, so build stories to it. And we were able to, and it's very, you know, community oriented. So we're able to build this platform, this technology platform, and this product and this idea and this process around that. The other thing that's really great about sports is that media people look down on sports people. They actually don't even pay attention to it. For like the first 2 to 3 years, nobody even knew who we were or cared what we were doing, which was fantastic because we screwed up a lot. And we built something that was really powerful, so that when we launched The Verge, which is our technology site, and when we launched Polygon, which is our video game site, when we launched Vox, which is our news site, people were suddenly like, whoa, this is amazing, y'all are brilliant. Where were you this whole time? We're like, we were doing sports, what's up? And that allowed us to screw up a lot, right? And so the innovation, the way that it's changed is that first we were able to do that without a lot of attention. And now we're doing that out in the open a lot, and we're doing it around stories that are more serious and that matter. And so I think that's been our shift. And, you know, we've had to kind of think about how do we do it at this big scale now of all these different topics that we cover.
So, you know, when we talk about innovation, we talk about failure a lot. Failure sucks, but it's part of innovation, and it's something that people have to get used to, being in an environment where you're trying things and maybe not being successful. Do you guys want to talk about some of your failures, or we could call them lessons learned, or things you'd like to do differently?
You start.
I mean, and you work with different organizations, so you could talk about their failures and not your own.
So I will, because at the NRA, we don't make mistakes on most things. So yeah, on the side as well, since I'm seen as sort of this connector in the food and technology space, I do end up advising a lot of startups, like off the record. They never put me on their website, thank God.
Off the record, we're on a live stream.
Well,
Oh
no,
my God.
not off the record, more like from the company perspective, like they won't list me, which is good because of the conflict. So I won't name any names. But I have advised many startups who are attacking the wrong pain point. And that is like a huge issue, especially when you're dealing with restaurants and food. Restaurants, you know, have a very little profit margin. And so there's very little room to mess up. So if you're trying to sell something to a business to use your service, it has to really capture the pain point perfectly and have a really brilliant solution. There have been many startups that I've seen in this area that are just off like a little bit. Like there was like people wanting to dine out together, and it was like a group organizing an app around people wanting to eat food together, and they could be strangers. And I don't really want to eat with any strangers. Or, you know, if I'm going to go on a date, I probably don't want to use this special app to talk about food and stuff like that. It just didn't quite work. It was like, well, people are already dining out. That's not the issue. I don't think you need to organize it that way. So it was a lot of refocusing, let's talk to some of the businesses that you actually want to do business with and figure out what their real struggle is, not just what's in your head.
Yeah, no, well, this point that actually both you kind of mentioned, I think is really important. I think it's like people talk about, we're going to build the next Facebook. It's going to be for 1 billion users, whatever. I actually think that's very hard to do. I mean, even if you look at Facebook itself, it started like on a college campus because freshmen wanted to look at photos of other people in the freshman class, like very narrow use case. And then you expand from there, or starting with sports, because it's like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense the way you can structure a thing, and then expanding to other things, or for us, kind of starting with journalists. Okay, that's what is their problem as social media editors, but then, you know, other people like brands and PR people and governments and stuff like that want to use it. So I think, yeah, really making sure that what you build is like absolutely essential to the people who need it at first, and then expanding to different places.
And that's your lesson learned?
What lesson there?
We're going to come back to you. Okay, go ahead, Trey.
Our lesson learned is that we didn't build a diverse company from the very start. And if y'all are going to go do that, I highly recommend it. This is actually really exciting to be in this room, because this audience and y'all are look like a really outstanding, diverse group of people. And I hope that y'all go into media and help change the face of it. Here's the reason that matters is that we're telling stories. We're out there reporting. We have perspectives. And so there's a journalism reason that you have to have diverse newsrooms. There's also, the reality is, like, we're building products out there that people use, and there's lots of assumptions that are built into those products. And so having diverse teams that are thinking about, you know, how they're designing them, it's great to go out and like do user research and build diverse groups that way. But the reality is, like, as you know, we didn't start early enough, and you know, lesson learned, and then we've been working through making our team more diverse and our company more diverse, and things just get better and better and better each step that we take, and we have a long way to go. But you know, that was my biggest lesson learned, and you know, it's one that, you know, for everybody that I advise, you know, to start thinking about it, because, you know, you have to start building networks and relationships and perspectives early on.
At what point did you notice that was an issue?
Well, we started, you know, it was really early. I mean, relatively early. We were in sports, and it was really hard to recruit developers, designers, journalists. You know, it turns out that there's a lot more dudes that are writing about sports, you know, probably for sort of systemic reasons. And by that, I mean, I'm not saying that that there's more people interested in it. I'm saying like people out there with experience that we're hiring. And so what we said is, you know, look, like, that's a problem. You know, we want to work on that. And then as we started launching other verticals, you know, we saw as an opportunity to, you know, diversify our audience. And so I think it was, you know, really acute, you know, once we had grown to a certain size where, you know, again, like, we weren't under the radar, yeah. You know, where people start paying attention, and you have a lot more really valuable community critique. Here's the other thing I would say, is that when you get, you know, when you're building something and you get feedback and critique, you know, you have to find that balance of listening and acting on it. But it's really important to listen to people who are giving you feedback and find the right way to channel that and into a really positive and productive way, whether that's about your product or that's about like the diversity of your company.
So, you know, we hear a lot about venture capital and people raising funds. Bert, I want you to talk about that a little bit, but really Trey as well, because Vox had to be funded too. I mean, Bert, I know you've been through the whole process of raising money and then selling. So if you could give some insight in that, as well as any lesson learned in that process.
Well, yeah, I guess, I mean, there's maybe a perception out there that you can go to, you know, Silicon Valley and you have some awesome idea and people start like throwing money at you to build it and all that, but that is not really true. So, and maybe you don't actually want this money too. I mean, there's a lot of hype around like, look at these companies, look at how much money they raise. Look at Vox, they raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Anyway,
Yeah, I told you we had
valued at over $1 billion. Anyway, but which is great, like when you get to a certain stage. But when you're really early on, I almost think money can be damaging to a company because you don't know what you're doing yet. And the more money you get from other people, the more now you have people who kind of can tell you what to do and have control over what you do, and the less options you have for how to potentially do something else, because you are working for them because they have invested in you. This is something I mentioned too. There's a lot of perception like, I'll start my own company because I don't want to have a boss. But like, you actually can't, your bosses are the investors, and you can't just quit if you don't like how things are going and go get another job, because you are the person they invested in.
You can't quit being
Right?
you.
Yeah, you can't quit being you. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. Like, yeah, I mean, there is definitely like a place for raising money when it makes sense, but I think there's just a lot of hype, and this sounds weird for me to say this, because I mean, initially when we were trying to raise money, we're like, well, we can't. Who knows if we will get any money? I don't know. Like, who's going to invest in us? Is like this former journalist and a young developer guy. Like, but I mean, I guess it is kind of a big lesson learned. I guess one lesson is to, think about the next step after the step that you're on and how things play out, and kind of play that out in your head ahead of time, because all these little decisions do have an impact then on what you can do later.
And then Trey, how about with Box? How's the money thing kind of work for you guys?
Money's great.
You love money.
No, you know what? Look, here's the deal with raising money and building a company is that you really need to understand what you want to do, what you're building, what do you need for what you're building, right? A lot of people go out and raise money and to your point, like, I'm not sure that they know what they're doing with that money, how they're going to use it. I'll tell you all a story is that when we raised, the way the process works is you raise some angel, some seed, maybe some money from your family, friends and family. And then, you go through this process, series of investment, A, B, C, D, whatever. And we had successfully raised some angel money to help fund what we were building at the very beginning. I was very modest. And nobody thought that it, people that I know from back then are like, I can't believe it became this thing. Because that's how rickety the idea seemed at the time, like sports blogs, like, have you heard of ESPN? And you have to sort of believe in what that idea is and have an idea of how you want to use that money, right? But here's the deal is that to the point that Bert's saying is that you also are looking for partners, right? What you're looking for people, they can tell you what to do, or, what you can do is look for really great investors. So what a lot of people talk about is, be careful of who you're working with, who you're partnering with when they give you that money. They're also looking to bring a lot more value, and you can find people who are really valuable investors. They're smart investors. They've done it before. They're going to bring you a lot of, ideas. But they have to be bought into what your idea is, and you have to be bought into your idea and how you're going to spin that. So here's a story: is that we were raising our Series A. We went all over the country and talked to a lot of different people. My boss and I, who's now the CEO, and we talked to people in San Francisco, talked to people in New York. We traveled everywhere, and we were in New York, and from some Silicon Valley investors, some folks from Excel called us up and said, why didn't you talk to us? And we're like, oh, they're a blue chip investor. We thought, I don't know if this was your idea, to be investing in a media company. And they're like, well, we think about it a little bit differently. And we sat down with them and we put our deck out. And the first part of it is just explaining what SB Nation is, because, folks are trying to figure out what it's all about. And our investor just flipped through the first, few pages of it. It's like, I'm going to put these aside because I already use your product and I want to understand how I can be a great partner and how y'all want to spend this money. What's the opportunity that we see here? And so then we're able to tell a story about, how they're going to, what we're trying to build and how they're going to be a part of it. And that's the main thing that I tell people who are interested in kind of raising money and doing this is what you're trying to figure out is the story that you're trying to tell overall, like what story do you want to be a part of and who do you want to be part of that story? And how are you going to talk them into being part of that if you want them to be there? And that's how we've raised money over the years, all the way up into our most recent investment from NBC Universal. And, they were a type of partner that we needed at this stage in the game. Would they have been the right ones at, Series A? Absolutely not. Are they the right one today where we're turning into a global media company? Absolutely.
So Anna, in the food industry, I'd like to know a little bit about how they fund innovation. And it's not just restaurants. I mean, if you think about the food industry, there's Instacart, there's Favor, there's Blue Apron, you know, that deliver the food that's not quite ready and you prepare it yourself. What have you experienced in terms of like new ideas and how they get them funded in with your clients and in your industry?
Sure. So you kind of have to take a step back and think about how the food industry is changing as a whole and what consumer demand looks like today. So back in the day, you know, QSR, quick service restaurants, fast food restaurants, that was fine and de rigueur for college students and anyone who wanted it basically. But as palates have changed, as this generation have gotten older, we've carried along our sort of discerning palates and we want better food. The first fast casual brand that hit the market was Chipotle many years ago, and you see that reflected in Panera Bread and a lot of others that are just down the road actually. So when you think about, you know, investing in restaurants, it's really investing in a consumer palate. There are some other trends that are coming out. I won't get too much into it, but basically people want spicier food, they want more ethnic food. And so I think we're gonna see a rise of Thai and Indian fast casual restaurants soon. So there's that side of things. When it comes to technology, consumer-facing technology, I'll take that as a segment as well. What we use today, OpenTable, Yelp, Instacart, that sort of stuff, Blue Apron. I use HelloFresh, they seem all right. That goes along with also sort of the discerning palate and people wanting to use food as kind of an emblematic of whom they are. So when you see the food pictures on Instagram and things like that, it's because people are expressing themselves through food. So this is what I ate this morning. It was a taco. It was delicious. It was from Torchy's. I take a photo of it. I put it on my social networks. That is representative of me. So back in the MySpace days, remember we would change all of our page colors and our the song that would play that would pop up. You don't remember that, yeah?
I was there.
Yeah.
Any of you remember that?
That was also emblematic of who we were and how to express ourselves. So food has become sort of this new form of expression because there's frankly better food out there to express yourself with. So when we're looking at consumers and what they're doing, anything that grabs onto that is really important. So that's why you see so many different reservation companies popping into the space. You see Yelp killers coming along, I hope. And you see things about getting food to you faster. So the on-demand economy is huge, here to stay, and we're coming up with all sorts of ways to make that even faster. Next week, I'm actually presenting a drone demonstration to people on food delivery. So that'll be really cool.
Get your taco delivered by a drone.
Yeah.
I'm ready for that.
Or if you think actually miniature drones, so like this size drone, like flying around and like bringing things to you within your office. Like that's where we're going. And then if you think about back of house in restaurants, technology and innovation, I'm really obsessed right now with IoT, Internet of Things, sensors that tell you things like how hot or cold your refrigerators are. Remember I told you that restaurateurs have a very small profit margin. So if your refrigerator goes in the middle of the night, you have about 30 minutes if you know that refrigerator is blown to go and save all your food. Otherwise you've lost like a whole bunch of stuff in the walk-in. So a lot more stuff like that. And then robotics. So I'm also very obsessed right now with the idea of automation and robotics in the restaurant industry. I'm not going to tell you where I see it going first because I feel like that would be giving away a few things. But we're going to look at some in Silicon Valley in a couple of weeks that I'm very, very excited about that will take the place of some hourly workers in the back. That will be really, really interesting.
I feel like I should pay you because we are just started this week our very first drones and sensors course, a 1-hour course. Are any of you in it by any chance? Anybody in here?
Y'all should take it.
Okay, it's only like 10 people are in it, and we meet online for 2 weeks, and then we'll have a workshop where we're going to fly a drone. Dale Blassingame, who's right back there, is also teaching it with me. He's the drone person. And then I'm heading up the sensor side. So we're on the cutting edge of the innovation that Anna just talked about. We need a robotics class,
That's
apparently.
great. I don't know
next.
if you want to examine your refrigerators here at Texas State, but
That could be a project. So Anna came up with like some forward-thinking, cutting-edge, like here's what's happening in innovation. What do you guys see as on the horizon for innovation? Things that you guys are thinking about for the future?
Yeah, well, I think this idea of, for media related stuff, the idea of community is actually something which SB Nation started at, but and we've seen develop on social networks in some way, but I really feel like we've barely scratched the surface of what is possible between like media and the community that they serve. And I don't use the word audience here on purpose because I think that is kind of a passive way of thinking about people. I think, it's really interesting what you could do if you could actually leverage the power of a group of people who are passionate about something like sports, for example, is obviously a great example, but really any niche topic, if you could really kind of figure out better ways for the journalists to kind of act more like moderators, community managers, editors of what people are saying, sparking conversation, but really getting a broader group of people involved in that. I think, we've just started to scratch the surface of that. I mean, the social web should not just mean Facebook and Twitter and these things. I really think the internet empowers people to be social in ways that we haven't even yet imagined. So I think that's really a major thing to still be developed.
I agree with that, first of all. Also, I'm super into drones and Internet of Things. You should go get a drone before you have to register it with the government because they've got 30 days before they're enacting that. So even like if you buy it at Best Buy, it's crazy. Here's what I'm obsessed with. How many of y'all use WhatsApp? Right on. How many of y'all use Kik? Anybody? What about Facebook Messenger? Right on. So here's what I think is going to be really big is messaging. Here's what I think is already super big, messaging. Is most of y'all already raise your hands. And I think the opportunity is that, really what we're seeing is a shift from the way that we've thought about our social networks, which are really these kind of communication systems, really. Messaging is this platform where we've gotten very comfortable talking to each other, and now these platforms are evolving where we're sharing a lot of media in them. And I think there's, to the point about community, I think there's a big opportunity to figure out what it means to provide a valuable service and a valuable news service on messaging platforms. And I don't think it's just going to be news services. I think there's going to be all sorts of services. I think that media for too long has been sort of preoccupied with its product. If it's a newspaper or magazine, we've built all these systems to kind of build those specific products. And as we evolve into a mobile world, those products are starting to break down. We're trying to force them into phones. It's not working. But what y'all are doing is starting to shape, how do we actually communicate with each other? How do we actually provide value to each other? And I think that media companies really can be in that space and figure out a way to be valuable. The thing that I'm sort of obsessed with actually around this is this idea of building, a service is on a messaging system. You're like, how would a media company be there? I'm like, this is where I'm talking to my friends and sharing stuff. Is this idea of building bots, which are just, really services that, you can add as apps to your messaging platform, but you can ask them questions and they can provide value back. Where should I eat tonight, for example? Got restaurant people here.
You should definitely go out and eat.
Should go eat. But where should I eat? Here's what I'm interested in. And that those bots start to learn and start to provide value. I think we can do the same thing in news. I think we can do that in all sorts of different categories. I think that we're going to kind of invert the space a little bit where messaging is the platform and we're building apps and services on it. And so it's a fun time, right? Because it's brand new to think about that. If you're thinking about I want to write or I want to publish or I want to provide information to people, the idea that it's always going to be an article, the idea that it's going to be the same type of media, y'all should throw that out right now. It's not going to be that way. Those are very valuable forms. Don't get me wrong. They're not going to go away. We're not going to lose those things. But we're going to have to be really smart about how we can tell stories anywhere, wherever the audience is or our users. Thank you for throwing out the audience. This is a very old school media way of talking about it. But everywhere that we can reach that community that we're trying to build around. So that's what I think, everybody should be playing with that. It's a fun time.
So even throwing out the idea that it all has to be public too, right?
Yeah.
So for example, I could ask a bot inside WhatsApp, what's up with the Syrian crisis? And it'll tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the really interesting thing, I think, is that, with what's happening, and this is related to a lot of the technology shifts that are happening, is that we can now store a lot of data. We can now compute a lot faster and at a higher scale. So artificial intelligence that's behind that, the amount of data that we can store, what we can start to do is learn and respond faster. So, it can take into account, I'm here in San Marcos and I'm asking about, the flood, right? And it's like, oh, well, you should get out of where you're at right now. First of all, if you're asking about like what's happening in the flood, being able to learn, what you already know about a topic or what you're interested in the topic. Personalization is really just kind of scratching the surface of how I think that we're going to be able to program, information and content and community to people on these platforms, because they're going to be a lot smarter. And it sounds kind of scary and utopian, but I think it's going to be super rad.
Super rad.
I want to open this up for questions in a second. So while you're forming your questions, if you'll kind of go stand near where Kelly Caulfield is, raise your hand, Kelly, and then we'll bring a mic over there for you because we need to get it on the mic. But while you're coming up with all your questions, I'm kind of obsessed with this idea of preparing for jobs that don't exist yet. Anna, your job didn't exist when you were in school. And Trey, chief product officer for a media company, maybe was something else and not exactly what you're doing now. Bert, you started a new thing completely from scratch, and there probably were some new positions that you filled within that as you were staffing up. So what is your best advice for students to be able to be prepared for something that maybe doesn't exist now, but some of these innovations that you're talking about are going to require them to move into completely new roles? Like, how did you do it?
Oh. I didn't take no for an answer. That was probably the biggest thing, is I just figured if a no meant, well, they just need a few more minutes to think about this.
Just grab that mic.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry.
They're going to share.
Threw me off.
No, you're on.
Okay, but as we both mentioned, I think drone pilot actually is a serious skill you should probably learn. Like, go ahead and get that. Just learn how to do that, and just file that away, because I guarantee you, if you apply for a job with any of our companies and it also says, oh, BTW, I'm also a drone pilot, you're like, that's awesome. Let's do some fun things together. So that sort of stuff, any sort of add-ons that you can do either through one of Cindy's classes, learning something about sensors or IoT, that puts you ahead. I think in general though, flexibility to me is probably the biggest thing. So don't get so married to your baby, like really be able to like massage your ideas and like let go of things and learn to be flexible. That is so important in my job, because I was often told no, or calm down, or don't get too excited or something like that. And so being flexible and being able to move my attention span to something else really quickly has been very helpful.
Okay. Well, no, I think you really do need to find your passion and the thing that you are obsessed with. Actually, maybe this is a little bit counter to being flexible. I mean, you can't be so obsessed that you don't listen to anybody else, of course, but like to be successful at something, I mean, it's a very competitive world now. I mean, again, somebody else said, I think all your competition is just one click away on the web, like in terms of being a writer or if, creating media or whatever it is. I mean, it's very competitive. And I think like more than ever, if you really are specialized and niche about something, that is very valuable. And you need to find the thing that you are going to be obsessed with, that it's not a job. It's not the thing you do 9 to 5 because you have to do it. And when is the clock going to strike 5 so I can like dart out of the office? Find the thing that you think about all the time, that you wake up in the shower and you're thinking about it. And when you go home, you want to read more about it, that you do as your hobby. I mean, for some people that is coding, and that's why those are the people who are the best, programmers out there, because they are obsessed with it. It's not just because they had to learn it in some class. So find that thing for you, and I think that's where you will be the most successful.
It's true. I love food. I actually have a set of cutlery tattoos on my arm. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
That's a serious commitment.
Yeah,
I don't have a culinary tattoo or a media tattoo. Here's my advice. Be really good at writing, and communicating. And I know this is Comm Week, so here's the thing: being able to communicate and share your ideas in a really concise way is really important. It's too often like people have ideas or they're trying to come up with things and they just can't write it. And they can't get the idea out to other people. And it's going to serve you in all sorts of different roles, whether you're making movies, you're making video, you're making apps, it doesn't matter. If you're a good writer, it's going to serve you super well. So be really good at it and work really hard at it. If you want to be doing communication, I would try to write every day, no matter what you're doing, because it's just a really good exercise for being a great communicator. The second thing is that, I think that you really have to, in terms of like jobs that don't exist. I know you could learn to write, and those exist for these jobs. The flexibility is really important, but you also have to like learn some things and be prepared to pay some dues. Like I was joking earlier, but like you get some of the really like, and that takes different forms. I don't mean like go get a crap job and like suffer for like 3 years or whatever. What I'm saying is like go find something that's hands-on that you can learn with. And sometimes that means just go make something. I think I was here last year and said the same thing. So if you were here last year, I'm sorry that I'm repeating myself. But when you go out and you make something, you learn a lot about what it takes to kind of, start from scratch, build something, not, follow through on an idea and get it out there. And putting that on a resume is impressive, even if it's just a website about some obsession, even if it's just like a YouTube video series, even any of those things, they matter because it shows that, you went out and you were on the grind for a while around that stuff. So here's just to give you an example, concrete example, the way that we would go out and find our writers for SB Nation is not that we would go find existing bloggers writing about a team, right? The condition wasn't that we were trying to find people who had a really big community and audience and readers that were all around what they had done. It was that they would do it every single day, maybe multiple times a day, and they never stopped if the team was good or bad or whatever. It's that they were dedicated to it and that they were making something, and at the end of the day, they could be proud of like what they had put out there, whether or not they had, built up a big audience. And so, I think making something is really important for no matter what, because there's no way that we're going to tell you what it's going to be when you get out and what these jobs are and these things. It's moving so fast right now. Like we're up here talking about drones and IoT, and we weren't talking about that last year, and we weren't talking about messaging last year. It's going to be something different next year. And virtual reality, if y'all haven't seen some of that stuff like that, that is getting like real, like super real. What Facebook's doing with Oculus is really incredible. And that's going to take all sorts of skills about being able to tell stories and connect with people that I think I'll just go back and say writing's important for.
So I feel like I should pay Trey because this is the fundamentals of digital and online media. Most of you are in this FDOM, right? And your big project is your blog, right? We didn't just assign that to torture you, to make you write a blog. This is what professionals are looking for when they hire you. Are you passionate about a topic? Have you taken the time to make something that demonstrates what you can do? So thank you, Trey, for that.
So one more thing, and specifically this is for the women in the audience, not to get gender specific, but you definitely need to read Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. You definitely need to read Bossy Pants by Tina Fey. Those are two really, really great books. And I never thought that I would be talking a lot or thinking a lot about women in business, but it's so important. And I know I struggled with for a long time self-doubt and wondering when someone was going to figure out that I didn't know everything. I think that's a poison that women tend to feed ourselves. And so just as soon as you can break out of that, the best.
And that's really good advice because we have so many female students in Mass Comm. And one of my goals is to try to introduce technology and programming into our discipline because we already have a lot of women here. And we have a lot of diverse people who may not be interested in computer science, but they're really interested in technology when it's presented to them in an interesting and contextually meaningful way. So we want your questions now. Anybody want to jump up and...
I'll kick it off with the first question.
Okay, go ahead, Don.
So thank you all for speaking to a lot of the different topics that we talk about in this class. And one that we do that other SJMC students that might not even be in the digital class is, Trey, you talked about it's not necessarily about building the audience, but being consistent. I was wondering if you could, or if anybody could give advice on how to reach their communities. I think a lot of them are starting out and trying to find people that have similar passions in them and getting readership. And it's exciting when you put out a blog post and somebody that you don't know read it, and it's exciting to realize that these people are out there, So I guess what advice would any of you give to a student starting out trying to reach their community and engage with something beyond just, hey, read my blog, but actually building a community there?
Trey said I had to do it. I'd say consistency is probably the most important thing. So don't just expect that you put one blog post out and it's going to get a lot of attention. You have to do it consistently, and eventually it'll happen. But as far as finding niche communities, I think Tumblr is like the best place to go for that.
Yeah, I mean, y'all, where's that social media group at? What's up? Twitter is kind of a big deal. I don't know in this, and there's I think that when we first started this, nobody was paying attention to us in sports, and to be honest, I wasn't really paying attention to anybody in journalism either. But when I did start to engage with that community, I did that through Twitter, right? And I didn't know any of those folks, and it's not like they were coming and knocking on the door, sending me emails and being like, your website's amazing. It was actually because I was just listening to the conversations. I was participating in those conversations. I was adding value to those conversations. And then when I had the opportunity to meet those people in person, we already had a relationship that we had developed. And I felt like I knew those folks for a long time. And occasionally I would share things with them, but I wasn't like pushing stuff. I was just, they'll click through to your bio and find your link on there and click through and they'll read it. Everybody does it. Like, who's this person? What's up with them? But do that. Just be authentic in that and be real in that. And try to, tap into communities that you want to be part of. It's not easy. And sometimes, I think that you have to, you just have to work hard at it. It's easier said than done, and it's not, especially, for those of y'all who may, not be as familiar or have grown up around that type of, experience. It can be intimidating, but, I would just suggest getting out there.
Yeah, I mean, don't be afraid to reach out to people. I think people actually do want to see new ideas, think about new things, especially if you do it in a way, it's not like, hey, read this thing I just wrote, but it's actually like, I wrote this and I really admire your writings, and the things you think about this. Do you have any advice for me? Or something like that. I mean, I think people are flattered if you come to them in that way, and for whatever the topic is that you're covering, kind of find who are it doesn't even have to be like, okay, the New York Times reporter or whatever, the Vox reporter who covers this huge thing. Maybe it's a much smaller local thing, and you find the person who is kind of an influencer in that community, and just be genuine with them and reach out directly. An email. I think people, if they get an email and see you care about this, you're asking for advice, I don't know who wouldn't respond to that.
I just want to make one more point though. Just make something really good. Be focused on making the thing. Because sometimes people give this advice be yourself and whatever, and it'll just magically happen, and we're all come from different positions of privilege around this stuff, and that means different things. But if you just make something really good and focus on it, people are going to find it and tap into it. So that's the best thing that you can do.
From what Bert just said about reaching out to people, I don't know if you still do it in this class, but in a lot of the classes I do, I have students as an assignment ask questions of 3 people on Twitter. And people have gotten really interesting responses. They've gotten internships out of it. They've made, great contacts for networking. It works. It really works. Sometimes they don't want to do it, but once they do it and they realize that they'll get a response and that a lot of people are really interested in helping them, then it becomes a more natural thing. I think we have a question in the back.
Yes. Okay, so my name is Rebecca, and I'm majoring in digital media mass communications. And I guess this question is kind of connected to the last question. I think I not only, I speak for others when I say that networking is really hard. And I think it's mainly because we're scared that we're not good enough for other companies or corporations. And I think if you guys could give us some tips on how to start networking or how to continue with networking, that would be great.
let me just say one thing too. Everybody's making everything up. Like we're up here, like, just to this point about like, this idea that everybody is like at this like different level. Like just remember that like you have this opportunity, you're making something new and there's a lot of value in it. There's a lot of value in new perspectives and ideas. And, a lot of these folks are hungrier for that than you realize, and if you're bringing that and you're able to kind of put like real action behind it, it's a very meaningful thing, right? So, if you're starting with making something, realizing that like, some of these folks are just, I think especially in digital media these days, like sort of flying by the seat of their pants about like how this stuff is going to work. There's a lot of smart people, no doubt, but y'all are super smart too, and I think like bring something fresh to it. So from a networking perspective, I'm not saying to like walk into it and be like, I'm just as smart or whatever, but like what I would say is like that just be confident in what you're putting together and start, meaningful conversations about, the questions that you really have. The point about questions is a really good one. Just listening to people is the best way of networking.
Yeah, I don't know where I picked up on networking, but I started doing it really young. And I think it just started with a curiosity and wanting to know what people were up to. And so whenever I would go to networking events, for example, I'm sure that there are still networking events you can go to, I'd always have several questions in mind that I could ask kind of universally. Gosh, I can't even come up with any right now, but like it was always related to the topic at hand. And like, why are you interested in this? Or what is your expertise in that area? And when you turn it around and make it about the other person, they're more likely to talk about themselves. People generally like to do that. So giving them an opportunity to talk about themselves is really good for networking. Definitely find them on Twitter. That's a really good piece of advice, because I think that's how I started annoying Bert one day, was on Twitter, actually. And people remember, people are just people. Like, I would be happy to answer any other questions for you guys or network with you or teach you about that. It really is about having confidence to just go out there and do it.
So Bert, we're having a meetup tonight with Hacks Hackers that all of you can come to, and we'll talk with you, and it will not be scary, and there'll be a lot of cool, interesting people there. That's happening in Austin. Do you want to talk about sort of the meetup culture? And
okay, yeah, I guess I was trying to find people who cared about this stuff, so I started my own meetup, figuring they would maybe come to me, hopefully, and give an excuse that I could then like bring people together. And so that's one thing, I guess. Yeah, meetup.com, which is maybe not the most awesome platform for everything, but anyway.
That's where you can find things to go to in your area.
Yeah, events to go to, people who care about a lot of niche topics locally. So yeah, that was kind of my feeling. Like I went to some of these events. I felt like, who am I to be doing this journalism innovation stuff? I was a reporter off in the hinterlands of the world, but I was totally new to all this, so I needed to start from scratch, I felt, and yeah, just kind of started my own thing and asked people to show up and just displayed real interest in what people were doing, gave a place for other people to talk about what they do. I almost never actually speak at any of the Hacks and Hackers events. I usually just introduce people. I think this is one of the few that I actually am talking at that I'm doing today in Austin, because I think really kind of, flattering people again, asking for advice, asking them to talk about what they do is the best way to get, people interested. It's the classic, what is it, how to win friends and influence people like guide, right? That's what it's all about. Just get people talking about what they're passionate about.
And I always say, just don't be afraid to be the stupidest person in the room. That's really the preferred scenario, where that's where you have the most potential to learn something. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're not going to learn anything from anyone there. It's a difficult scenario to put yourself in that position, but once you get comfortable with that, and believe me, somebody that's a PhD on a faculty doesn't like to feel stupid, but you have to recognize that that's where you're going to learn something. So, find something you want to learn more about, find a group that has that capability, and go there with the open mind, with the listening mentality, and showing an interest and a passion for what they're doing.
Yeah, and if there's drinks, like, keep it to one.
Drinks,
One,
tacos,
and
awesome.
don't eat while you're talking to someone, please. And yeah, seriously, only have like one drink, and then maybe just like some tonic water or something like that. Like, truth. from experience. I don't drink very much at networking things, okay?
I think there's a question at the back.
My name is Chris. I'm an electronic media major. My question is for Anna. So how do we get that project proposal document you told us about?
I have business cards, but yeah, I can tweet out the link to it. I'll put it on Google Docs. Yeah.
Do we have more questions? Is that anybody over here?
I was just kind of wondering what y'all's thoughts are on the current state of monetizing journalism with ad blockers and native advertising, as well as how does Vox feel now that they have to compete against the New York Times as well as CNN, different news stations that take over different platforms traditionally?
The monetizing question.
Monetizing,
The drinking game.
or as we call it, making money. So your question about, so here's the deal, is that it's one of the biggest challenges we have right now in media and journalism is how we build sustainable business models around it, right? And what the different opportunities are. And, we've got, I would say the media industry and, started off in digital in kind of a crummy spot, which is that they decided that they were going to kind of outsource that aspect of it, right? They're like, if you were designing websites back then, you'd be like, here's a gray box, an ad goes here. I don't care what goes in it. If you were on the editorial side, you're like, the business people figure out what's going on over here. And I think what's happened is that in digital media in particular, when you outsource it that way, when you give it away that way, it means that you're not thinking about the revenue portion of the business as part of the user experience. Even if it's a paywall, it's part of the user experience, right? And so I think what's happening now is, especially with ad blockers, is that, if you think about ad blockers, why do, the real question, there's media companies, approach that in pretty silly ways, but the real question is, why are people installing ad blockers, right? It's about performance. They want, they want pages to load quickly. It's about privacy. They want to understand, how's this working? It's kind of creepy when an ad follows you around. It's about security, malwares being installed on your machines. And so when you start to, and then the last thing is it's about user experience, right? And this is the most important thing is that, all those things matter to your user experience, of course, but in terms of how you interact, if there's a big, crazy, honking, flashing ad or something that takes over, that's a drag. You can't click off of it or something. So a really great experience is important. So from the perspective of, that's how we look at it, is that, a couple of years ago, kind of woke up one morning and I was like, you know what, should probably care about, the advertising experience on our sites because it's a big part of what we're doing. We're lucky because we were out in front of that early, and as mobile has evolved, you've had to think about that more than ever. You mentioned native advertising, which is, sponsored content, branded content, content that is, it basically marketers trying to tell stories alongside the stories that you're telling and the journalism that you're doing. We've been doing that for a while as well, and I think what's important there is thinking, is treating the user with a lot of respect, right? And saying, clearly labeling things, providing a lot of value through that, and making it part of the user experience. That's, by the way, we're not the only ones doing it. If you open Twitter right now on the Twitter client, there's native advertising there. You can just take a tweet and promote it. Same thing is true of Facebook. And so I think what's happening is, in the space in general, is that as mobile shifts, there's a lot more of a focus on what that user experience is. I think it's why Twitter and Facebook, people go to them for news, for example. So I worry less about New York Times and CNN. By the way, I don't mean that as a slight to either one of those. New York Times is an outstanding institution, and all of y'all would be lucky to work there. And I think there's some super, super smart people, and they're only going to continue to be outstanding. I'm not as familiar with CNN, but so I think less about competing with them. I think that, in fact, we collaborate with the New York Times as well. I think more about that we're really competing for attention, and we're competing for providing value to users. And so I think more about Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and things like that, that how do we provide a really valuable service? And if we can do that and we can kind of compete on that count, then we're doing really well.
Well, now I'm nervous because there's a camera on me, but okay, so my first question is for Anna, actually. So you were talking about how the possibility of like robots kind of like in the back parts of restaurants, and I've worked in the restaurant industry for like my whole life. So you were talking about how it would like eliminate the need for certain hourly jobs. Do you think that like, how do you think that's going to affect the job market for like other people? Because I know a lot of people rely on that like minimum wage, like hourly job to support their families. And so if there's just robots doing it, how is that going to affect the job market?
Sure. A little bit more of a political question than I expected when I came here today. That's fine. I think that would free up restaurant employees to have them focus on other things like hospitality that only humans can do.
I was short. I like it. Okay. And then my second is for Trey. And you were talking about communication through like different social platforms. And I think you mentioned how Facebook Messenger now has that like kind of Siri like app or application to it where you can like ask it like, hey, where should I eat? So my question is, do you think that since technology in that way is becoming such a larger thing that it's going to eliminate the face-to-face like aspect of communication between people, because people bond over like, hey, I went and ate at this really cool place the other day, you know, face to face, versus like texting like, hey, check out this place, you know, like send a link to it. It kind of like eliminates that need for face to face communication. So do you think it's going to end up like being like a Wall-E world eventually, because people are just in their own little space?
You know, here's a funny thing. I've been talking about the messaging thing with other folks and bots and services, and I actually I talked to a class at UT about it as well. And I actually get more questions like this from younger folks than I do from older folks, which surprises me. Like, you know, like I'm not a millennial. I'm something else. I'm old. And, you know, I think that maybe it's like the wonder of change or something, or maybe y'all are closer to like how that's impacting your lives and are more aware of it and being more thoughtful about it. I think it's really great that y'all are the ones that are asking those questions. They should be asked. We should figure out how we create really valuable experiences. I think that what I will say is like on a macro level around technology is every time there's a new technology, we sort of like freak out about it and how's it going to rewire our brains and do all that. But you know, that's been happening since, you know, technology's been advancing from the very beginning. So, you know, I think that we need to always be critical of technology in our lives, and we need to be, you know, examining it and thinking about how we use it and make sure that we bake in the very best of us to technology. But I'm not sure that like there's any reason to worry about, you know, what it's going to, I'm just saying, I don't think that there's like inherently a reason to worry about it.
But I think if you keep it top of mind, it also prevents it from happening. You know? Yeah,
but that's great product design, you know, and just working with your users about, you know, what are we trying to solve, you know, but there are real things to think about and all that stuff. So.
And then like piggybacking off of that, you were talking about AI earlier. I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast We Have Concerns or not, but are you? Okay, so I don't know if you listened to the one they did like a week back where they talked about artificial intelligence and about how it's really neat. And they talked about how, I forget who they were like impersonating, but they just uploaded like all of the interviews that this man has ever done and like anything he's ever said that's been publicly stated, you know, giving this artificial intelligence access to the internet as well. And it can formulate like an actual conversation, like how he would have it. So do you think that that's going to like come into a big play? Like, and then part of it was that they asked him like, oh, how do you see like the future? And they were like, oh, well, you know, you're my friend and I'll put you in my people zoo, you know, to like watch you like kind of talk about how one day take over. So like, how do you view that?
Well, I'll say that like, you know, there's a lot of people really like legitimately concerned that like we should like worry about AI taking over the world, and like those people maybe disturbingly are like people that run our technology companies. So maybe they know something we don't. But you know, I think if we're focused on, you know, what the value is, what the service is, you know, to us and like what we're trying to achieve, I think that we can like, you know, be designing these systems. This is, you know, I don't know how much there's like design here at the school, but Stanford has a really outstanding design school. And one of, you know, when they talk about that process, it's not making things pretty. it's thinking about how all these things work together. It's designing systems and being thoughtful about what the outcomes of those systems are. So when we're designing anything that we're putting together, I think we have to think about that stuff. I think it's a fun thing to have to think about, that we have these powerful systems that we can kind of, direct. So
we have one more question behind you. We want to get that in before we have to go. We have about 3 minutes.
Good to go. My name is Trevor, and I'm actually one of the ones who raised my hand who wanted to start their own company. So my question is actually for the entire panel. Talking about success and failures and how you first built all your respective companies and relationships, how long did it take for you to realize you were onto something great? And how difficult was it to kind of burst through those first obstacles to really break through?
Okay. No, I think it's kind of clear when you know you're onto something. I think like the idea of like you stop trying to convince people, oh no, this is what it is, but people actually kind of see what it is and take it and make it their own and do interesting things that you didn't even expect could be done with this thing that you have built. I mean, that for us was kind of a revelation with Storify, like, okay, this is going somewhere, like there is some potential here. And it's just like the idea has legs. You can talk about it, see where it goes, see where it gets bigger and bigger. I think, you have to find things that are like that. It can't be, something that anybody could just imitate and immediately copy what you're doing. But if you really have something that has some legs to it that's hard to do, but has a clear path of getting there, I think that's where you have to think.
We have one more question. We can maybe squeeze that in before we go.
Right. My name is Allison Crowley, and I am a PR major. And I had a question for Anna. You were a journalist undergrad, but what kind of transformed your interest to more like business oriented?
You want the honest
That's a
answer?
good question. You're on camera, remember?
Yes. Okay. How should I say this? I can actually tell you more about that later, but the biggest answer is probably I was very frustrated with journalism. No offense, guys. I was very frustrated that I kept having to explain the same things over and over again to people, and decided to leave and go to restaurants where I still have to explain things over and over to people. So it was frustration with journalism in general. And then it was also, I think I have more of a business mind, and so understand where those opportunities exist. And so I knew that bringing that all together would be good. And the bottom line was paycheck.
So what did you get your master's in?
Also journalism.
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
it's just really important to know that journalism skills are applicable across a range of careers. You can go into marketing, other types of business. Trey said before, communication is like the key thing. And so you can go in many, many directions, and it's all about creativity and innovation.
Yeah, the best thing I learned from J School was how to read people, and that's been very successful for me.
Well, we are out of time. I can tell by the shuffling. So let's thank everybody for being here on this panel.